Major Racey Jordan. We have seen clear evidence that the top authorities in Washington forbade the Allied army to strike for the heart of Hitler's Germany following the victorious Italian campaign in 1943. Dramatic evidence has also been presented to prove that at the same time as huge numbers of Allied troops were being diverted in order to participate in an irrelevant invasion of southern France, the top officials in Washington refused to pay any attention to repeated German offers to surrender. As a result of those apparently senseless blunders, dramatic changes took place in the political makeup of Europe. The course of history was changed. The reader must grasp the fact that although these amazing and unprecedented events staggered and startled individuals like Commander Ewell, General Mark Clark, General Kesselring and Admiral Canaris, these same decisions made a lot of sense to the unseen manipulators who were calling the shots and pulling the strings behind the scenes. They were working to a definite plan. They had their strategy clearly marked out. As the real truth is always carefully buried by the villainous perpetrators of a plot, it is necessary for us to look elsewhere for the missing pieces that will complete the jigsaw puzzle and make the big picture stand out in stark relief. That big picture goes together piece by piece, the constituent parts being found here a little and there a little, from the many hundreds of books that emerged from the blood, toil, tears and sweat of World War II. There is only one blood, toil, tears and sweat 165 that provides us with the piece of the jigsaw puzzle that is essential to our understanding of this crucial phase of history's bloodiest conflict. This vital book has, however, been shunned like a plague by all the right newspapers and magazines, ignored by all the movie moguls and buried by all the leading libraries across the nation. The book that received this extraordinary non-treatment is probably the most important book written about this critical period of history. It is From Major Jordan's Diaries, by George Racey Jordan. At the outbreak of the war, Jordan, a veteran of World War I, was living quietly as a businessman. Like many thousands of patriotic Americans, he re-enlisted in the belief that he and his fellow countrymen were honor-bound to fight for the defense of democracy and freedom. Because of his previous military and business experience, Jordan was given the job of a Lend-Lease expediter and a liaison officer with the Russians. In this important capacity, he served for 2 crucial years, from May 1942 to June 1944, at Newark Airport and at the Big Air Base at Great Falls, Montana. When he reported for duty on the 10th of May, 1942, his orders gave the full title of the New Jersey facility as United Nations Depot No. 8, Lend-Lease Division, Newark Airport, Newark, New Jersey, International Section, Air Service Command, Air Corps, U.S. Army. From the outset, Jordan was amazed at the influence wielded by the top Russian at the base, Colonel Anatoly N. Kotikov. It seemed as if his slightest wish was the command of those he was dealing with on a higher level in Washington. Repeatedly, Kotikov would call Harry Hopkins, Roosevelt's assistant, on the phone and get instant action. Repeatedly, the best interests of the United States Armed Forces were overruled in favor of projects that helped the Russians. Nothing, it seemed, was too good for our communist allies. "I call Mr. Hopkins. Mr. Hopkins fix," were words constantly heard by Jordan in his dealings with Kotikov. On one occasion, Colonel Kotikov flew into a towering rage when a Russian plane, donated by American Lend-Lease and paid for by American taxpayers, was involved in a minor accident with an American Airlines plane. Jordan thought that the Russian was bluffing when he told him that his friend Mr. Hopkins would take care of the crisis. I was wrong. On the 12th of June the order came, 166 descent into slavery from Washington, not only ordering American Airlines off the field, but directing every aviation company to cease activities at Newark forthwith. The order was not for a day or a week. It held for the duration of the war, though it was called a temporary suspension. I was flabbergasted. I was dazed at the speed with which the expulsion proceedings had taken place. First, a cab inspector had arrived. "Someone in Washington," he said, "had set off a grenade under the Civil Aeronautics Board." He spent several days in the control tower, and put our staff through a severe quiz about the amount of commercial traffic and whether it was interfering with Soviet operations. The word spread around the field that there was going to be hell to pay. Several days later, the order of expulsion arrived. I had to pinch myself to make sure that we Americans, and not the Russians, were the donors of Lend-Lease. I decided to start a diary, and to collect records of one kind or another. Jordan remembered and applied the excellent advice he had been given as a 19-year-old corporal in 1917. Jordan, if you want to get along, keep your eyes and your ears open. Keep your big mouth shut, and keep a record of everything. Now I felt a foreboding that one day there would be a thorough investigation of Lend-Lease. I was only one cog in the machinery. Yet because of the fact that I couldn't know the details of high-level strategy, I began the Jordan Diaries, pages 7-10. Harry Hopkins' history reveals that, from the outset in 1933, the Roosevelt administration was dedicated to the survival of the Bolshevik butchers in Russia. In that year, with Stalin's monstrous regime tottering on the brink of extinction, and with most of the nations of the civilized world giving Russia the diplomatic cold shoulder, the Roosevelt administration stepped in and granted diplomatic recognition to the blood-stained fiends who, for more than 15 years, had drenched the soil of Russia with the innocent blood of multiple millions of hapless slaves. Roosevelt's recognition of the Red Savages as the legitimate government in Russia gave them access to the credit and money markets of the world. Without such assistance, Russia was doomed. Blood, toil, tears and sweat. 167. The dedication shown by the top officials in Washington for the support and development of Red tyranny was demonstrated by Harry Hopkins in a speech he gave at a Russian aid rally at Madison Square Garden. A second front? Yes, and if necessary a third and a fourth front. The American people are bound to the people of the Soviet Union in the great alliance of the United Nations. We are determined that nothing shall stop us from sharing with you all that we have and are in this conflict, and we look forward to sharing with you the fruits of victory and peace. Generations unborn will owe a great measure of their freedom to the unconquerable power of the Soviet people. Page 12. Jordan states in his book that we never knew the exact use to which anything sent under Russian Lend-Lease was put, and the failure to set up a system of accountability is now seen to have been an appalling mistake. The British let us inspect their installations openly, and exchanged information freely. The Russians did not. Our government was intent on supplying whatever the Russians asked for, as fast as we could get it to them. Page 15. Russians suspicious. Although official Washington was depriving American forces of much needed war material in order to supply the Russians, the latter were deeply suspicious and refused to open the obvious best supply route, the one by air through Alaska and across Siberia. Stalin described this route as too dangerous, where the US was not able to force Russia's hand. Nazi submarines succeeded. Subs out of Norway were attacking our Lend-Lease convoys on the Murmansk route, apparently not regarded as too dangerous a route for American crews. A disastrous limit was finally reached when, out of one convoy of 34 ships, 21 were lost. The Douglas A-20 Havocs, which were going to the bottom of the ocean, were more important to Stalin than human lives. So first we started flying medium bombers from South America to Africa, but by the time they got across Africa to Tiflis, due to sandstorms the motors had to be taken down and they were not much used to the Russians. Nor were we able to get enough of them on ships around Africa to fill Russian 168 descent into slavery requirements for the big offensive building up for the Battle of Stalingrad. Finally, Russia sent its okay on the Alaskan-Siberian route. Americans would set up all the airport facilities in Alaska. Soviet pilots would take over on our soil. Soviet pilots only would fly into Russia. Later it came out that we actually built bases for the Russians in Siberia. Colonel Maxwell Yerdafi, the famous airport builder, and crews from the Alkan Highway project were ordered to Russia and kept in isolation and under Soviet guard as they built Siberian airports. Page 17. Major General John R. Dean in his book, The Strange Alliance, Viking 1947, observes that American aid to the Red Butchers was carried out with a zeal which approached fanaticism. Pages 90, 91. This statement is borne out by the fact that on the 1st of January, 1943, a memorandum sent to the commanding general, Air Service Command, stated, 1. The President has directed that equipment and movement of Russian planes have been given front priority, even over planes for U.S. Army Air Forces. P-20. This, then, was what motivated those who occupied the highest positions of political power in Washington. These individuals were dedicated to the advancement and development of Soviet tyranny. Aiding Russia was given top priority. Put simply, the welfare of Red Russia meant more to our leaders than did the welfare of our own armed forces. Jordan relates that in 1942 the Russians had been given 25 of the 200 horsepower diesel marine engines worth $17,500 each. They asked for an additional 25, but their request was overruled by Major General John Dean, chief of our military mission in Moscow, because General MacArthur needed them in the South Pacific. But the Russians were undaunted and decided to make an issue of it by going directly to Hopkins, who overruled everyone in favor of the Russians. In the 3-year period, 1942 to 1944, a total of 1,305 of these engines were sent to Russia. They cost $30,745,947. The engines they had previously received were reported by General Dean and our military observers to be rusting in open storage. It is now perfectly obvious that these diesels were post-war items, not at all needed for Russia's immediate war activity. Page 14. Blood. 12. Tears and Sweat 169. Although a complete, itemized list of America's Lend-Lease shipments are unobtainable through any agency of our government in Washington, Major Jordan, he was promoted to the rank of Major on the recommendation of Kotikov, see page 35, was able to obtain copies from the Russians. The dollar value of American aid to the Reds had annual dollar totals as follows. 1942, $1,422,853,332. 1943, $2,955,811,271. 1944, $3,459,274,155. 1945, $1,838,281,501. The grand total for the 4 years is $9.60 billions. From the pages of Major Jordan's diaries pour the explicit details of the type of aid given to Russia during these critical years. On 24 pages. Pages 83-106 Jordan lists, with quantities and dollar value items shipped. Included on this list are chemicals, metals and minerals suitable for use in an atomic pile and also in manufacture of the hydrogen bomb. Also included were cobalt metal and cobalt-bearing scrap, 806, 941 pounds, uranium metal, 2.2 pounds, beryllium, cadmium, cobalt ore and concentrate, 33,600 pounds, aluminum rods, 13,744,709 pounds, graphite, 7,384,482 pounds, insulated copper wire, 399,556,729 pounds, etc. Also on the list are items described by General Groves as purely post-war Russian supplies. These included 121 merchant vessels valued at $123 million, 1,285 locomotives worth $103 million, motor trucks and buses costing $508 million, tractors valued at close to $24 million, telephone instruments worth $33 million, generators valued at $222 million and $2,693,162, automobile inner tubes costing $6,659. 880. Major Jordan also lists major donations from Washington that were obviously designed to bolster the Red regime after the war. These gifts included 2 factories for food products. Price $6,924,000. 1 petroleum refinery. Cost $29,050,000. 1 repair plant for precision instruments. $550,000. And 17 stationary steam and 3 hydroelectric plants costing $273,289. 000. Experiences in Montana with the changeover to the Alaskan-Siberian route early in 1942. Russian Lend-Lease operations were transferred from Newark to Great Falls, Montana. Major Jordan was transferred to Great Falls as United Nations representative. Page 19. 170 Descent into slavery. Jordan relates that, in the spring of 1943, there was an unusual congestion of Airacobra pursuit planes at the Montana base. These were being used by the Russians as anti-tank weapons. Colonel Kotikov got furious when as many as 200 Airacobras were stacked up at the field. "We've got to have more pilots," he screamed. Jordan recalls, there was always a chronic shortage of American pilots, but in 1943 the demand was ravenous. In the Atlantic, in the Pacific, in Europe, in Asia, and in the American system of global air transport, which was a wonder of the war. Then, all of a sudden, something happened. 2 days later, out of inbound craft tumbled strange new flyers, bewildered and annoyed. Some had been snatched from well-earned rest between trips to Ireland. Others hailed from bases in Puerto Rico, Long Beach, Boca Raton, Oklahoma City. Test pilots had been plucked from right field. There were even a few prodigies with instrument certificates. Such defiers of storm and darkness were rare as hen's teeth. Few of the pilots had ever heard of Great Falls, and all were dumbfounded by its extensive facilities and operations. What the hell's going on here, they muttered. The answer was soon coming. Colonel Kotikov had gone straight to Mr. Hopkins. Pages 46-47. The black suitcases. Major Jordan became troubled by the unusual number of black patent leather suitcases, bound with white window sash and sealed with red wax, which were going through en route to Moscow. At first these suitcases were in charge of a Russian officer who claimed they were personal luggage, but soon they were replaced by armed couriers, traveling in pairs, whose excuse for avoiding inspection was that the cases were covered by diplomatic immunity. When asked about the cases by Major Jordan, Colonel Kotikov answered that they were of the highest diplomatic character. Comments Jordan. I am sure he knew that one of these days I would try to search the containers. Page 35. At 4 o'clock one cold afternoon in March, 1943, Colonel Kotikov did something that was unique. He invited Jordan to have blood, tears and sweat 171 dinner with him at a Great Falls restaurant known as Caroline Pines. Jordan was suspicious. What was Kotikov up to? Acting on a hunch, Jordan excused himself from riding to the restaurant in the Russian's car. He used his own car, which was driven by a soldier. In case of emergency, he preferred to have mobility. Asking his maintenance chief if the Russians were planning any flights, Jordan was told that, yes, there was a C-47 staged on the line, preparing to leave. It was being warmed up with Nelson heaters, large canvas bags, fed with hot air, which were made to slip over motors and propellers. Winter temperatures at the airport could be as severe as at Fairbanks, ranging from 20 to 70 degrees below zero. Oil would sometimes freeze as hard as stone, and 2 to 4 hours were required to thaw out an engine. Page 36. Calling the control tower, Jordan left the phone number of the restaurant and issued strict orders that no cargo plane was to be cleared for Russia except by himself. When Jordan joined Kotikov at the restaurant, he found that 4 other Russians had been invited to join the dinner party. Kotikov produced a bottle of vodka and the group drank toasts to Stalin and Roosevelt. At 8:30 p.m., when the group was nearing the end of dinner, the waitress handed the major a note asking him to call the control tower at once. Getting through to the tower, he was told that the plane was warmed up and that a couple of newly arrived couriers were demanding clearance. Without notifying the Russians, he threw on his greatcoat, raced to his car and ordered his driver to race to the hangars 4 miles away. When he reached the plane, a burly Russian appeared at a door and tried to prevent Jordan entering. He failed. Once inside the plane, Jordan could see by the dim light of a single bulb an array of the mysterious black suitcases and a second, leaner Russian guard. He indicated that he wished to examine some of the cases. Promptly they went insane. They danced. They pushed at me with their hands and shrieked over and over the one English word they appeared to know. It was diplomatique. I brushed them aside and took from my pocket a metal handle containing a safety razor blade. Sensing its purpose, the lean courier flung himself face down across the suitcases, with arms and legs outspanned to shield as many as possible with his body. I dragged one of the 172 descent into slavery containers from under him, and he leaped up again as I started to saw through the first cord. At this sight their antics and shouts redoubled. While opening the third suitcase, I had a mental flash that brought sweat to my forehead. The Russians were half mad with fury and terror. They were on both sides of me, in front and behind. Supposing, in desperation, one of them shot me in the back, there would be no American witness, and my death could be passed off as a deplorable accident. I called a Yank soldier who was on patrol 30 feet away. I asked if he had had any combat experience. He answered that he had, in the South Pacific. I stooped lower and murmured, I'm going to open more of this baggage. I want you to watch these 2 Russians. If one of them aims a gun at me, I want you to let him have it first. As the American guard snapped a cartridge in the chamber of his rifle, One courier jumped from the plane and sprinted for the hangars, where there were telephones. The other, his face contorted as if to keep from crying, began reknotting the cords I had severed. Major Jordan had no difficulty opening the suitcases. They were cheaply constructed. Taking cases at random, he had the opportunity to examine about 18 out of approximately 50. In one of the cases, Jordan found scores of road maps with strange markings on them. When taken as a whole, they formed a detailed nationwide chart, giving the names and locations of industrial plants. Another case contained a folder of what appeared to be military documents. It was marked, "From Hiss." Another suitcase contained a memo on White House stationery. It was from H.H. Harry Hopkins to McCohen, the number 3 man in the Kremlin. Accompanying the memo were 2 items of special interest. One was a thick map which bore the legend, Oak Ridge, Manhattan Engineering District. The second item was a carbon copy of a report from Oak Ridge. On the top of the first page it was marked Harry Hopkins. As he read the text of the report, Major Jordan encountered a number of words so outlandish that I made a memo to look up their meaning. Among them were cyclotron, protron and deuteron. There were curious phrases: blood, toil, tears and sweat, 173 like energy produced by fission and walls 5 feet thick, of lead and water, to control flying neutrons. Probably no more than 200 men in all the country would have been capable of noting down these particular expressions out of their own heads. For the first time in my life, I met the word uranium. The exact phrase was uranium-92. From a book of reference I learned afterwards that uranium is the 92nd element in atomic weight. At the time of this episode I was as unaware as anyone could be of Oak Ridge and the Manhattan District. The enterprise had been celebrated as the best guarded secret in history. It was superlatively hush-hush, to the extreme that army officers in the know were forbidden to mention it over their private telephones in the Pentagon. Pages 37-43. It was only when the Russians exploded their first atomic bomb in 1949 that the thunderous reality of where the Reds obtained their atomic secrets dawned on Major Jordan. These atomic secrets had come straight from the White House. Harry Hopkins wasn't kidding when he told the Russians at the Madison Square Garden rally in 1942 that he was determined that nothing shall stop us from sharing with you all that we have, the U.S. Treasury plates, with the passage of time. Major Jordan became increasingly alarmed. Finally, with events in Great Falls weighing heavily on his conscience, he decided to make a special trip to Washington to see if something could be done about the situation. As he was about to enter the office of John Newbold Hazard, the liaison officer for Lend-Lease at the State Department, he was waylaid by a young assistant. "Major Jordan," he began, "we know all about you and why you are here. You might as well understand that officers who get too officious are likely to find themselves on an island somewhere in the South Seas, with natural anger." I retorted that I didn't think the State Department had any idea how flagrant abuses were at Great Falls. I said we had virtually no censorship, or immigration or custom inspection. Crowds of Russians were coming in of whom we had no record. Photostats of military reports from American attaches 174 descent into slavery in Moscow were being returned to the Kremlin. Planloads of suitcases, filled with confidential data, were passing every 3 weeks without inspection, under the guise of diplomatic immunity. "But my dear Major," I was admonished with a jaunty wave of the hand, "we know all about that. The Russians can't do anything, or send anything out of this country without our knowledge and consent. They have to apply to the State Department for everything. I assure you the department knows exactly what it is doing. Good afternoon." Pages 111, 112. Jordan left the State Department with a heavy heart, sensing that his days in Great Falls were numbered. On the 13th of June, 1944, Major Jordan returned to Great Falls for the last time as an Army officer. He had just been replaced. During a farewell talk with Colonel Kotikov, the Russian mentioned that a money plane had crashed in Siberia and had to be replaced. He explained that the Treasury was shipping engraving plates, ink, paper and other materials to Russia so that they could print the same occupation money for Germans as the United States was printing. Jordan was sure that Kotikov must be mistaken. The United States would never agree to such a preposterous scheme. Surely the Russian meant that America was sending banknotes that could be used as the currency of Germany, following its defeat. "No," insisted Kotikov. The equipment had been shipped through Great Falls in May in 2 shipments of 5 C-47s each. The shipments had been arranged on the highest level in Washington, and the planes had been loaded at the national airport. It was several years before details of this staggering episode began to filter out into the light of day. A Senate investigation into the scandal confirmed the fact that, in spite of widespread protests and warnings about the consequences of such a move, Harry Hopkins, Henry Morgenthau, Secretary of the Treasury, Averell Harriman, the U.S. Ambassador to Russia, and Harry Dexter White, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury who was later exposed as a Russian agent, were able to exert enough pressure to see that Russia got the plates. Acknowledging that occupation money would be needed at the conclusion of the war, two veteran civil servants in the Treasury Department, D.W. Bell, Secretary of the Treasury, and A.W. Hall, Blood, Toil, Tears and Sweat 175, Director of the Bureau of Engraving, pointed out that the Treasury has never made currency plates available to anyone. To acquiesce to such an unprecedented request would create serious complications. To permit the Russian government to print currency identical to that being printed in this country would make accountability impossible. Pages 130, 131. Arguing against this sound logic was Harry Dexter White, who declared that he was loath to turn the Russian request down and that Russia was one of those allies who must be trusted to the same degree and to the same extent as the other allies. Morgenthau sent a memo to Soviet Ambassador Gromyko declaring that the U.S. Treasury is desirous to cooperate with the Soviet government in this matter in every possible way. Page 133. Morgenthau and his friends certainly did cooperate in every possible way. Official records show that the photographic plates and all the materials necessary for making high-quality reproductions were shipped from Washington, D.C. on the 24th of May, 1944. A second shipment, to replace the equipment lost in the alleged crash, was sent on the 7th of June. As the Red Army moved west, fueled by the massive infusion of American Lend-Lease aid, they set up shop in a former Nazi printing plant in Leipzig, and started the presses rolling. Why were the Russians so insistent upon printing the occupation currency in their own territory where there would be no accountability? Major Jordan says, the answer is quite simple. They knew that the U.S. Army would convert such currency into dollars. Russia, of course, refused to redeem the same currency with rubles. As a result, every Russian-made mark that fell into the hands of an American soldier or accredited civilian became a potential charge against the Treasury of the United States. The Reds paid their own occupation forces with these marks, adding a 2-year bonus for good measure. The American taxpayer footed the bill with the occupation currency, which cost them nothing. The Russians snapped up anything of value left in the German economy. If they could get anything out of America, that was even better. The Major continues. Any GI could buy a pack of cigarettes for 8 cents at a U.S. Army post exchange. For this, the Russian and German black markets would offer him 100 marks from the 176 descent into slavery. Leipzig Mint. To realize a profit of almost $10 on an 8-cent pack of cigarettes, the American had only to take his 100 Leipzig marks to an army post office, purchase a $10 money order and mail it to the United States. It was revealed that the standard offer for a 5-cent candy bar was 50 marks, or $5, $18 for 1 pound of Crisco, $20 for 1K ration, $25 for a pound of coffee, and $2,500 for a wristwatch costing $17. By December 1946, the U.S. military government found itself $250 million or more in the red. It had redeemed in dollars at least 2,500,000,000 marks, in excess of the total marks issued by its finance office. The deficit could have had no other origin than the Russian plant in Leipzig. In addition to the $250 million, there was a further loss, which though small was mortifying. A charge of $18,102 was rendered to the Soviet embassy, covering the expenses of the engraving plates and the materials in the 3 1944 deliveries. The bill was ignored and is still unpaid. Pages 134, 135. Harry Dexter White was handsomely rewarded for services rendered. In 1945, he was promoted to Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, and in 1946 he was appointed by President Truman and confirmed by the Senate as U.S. Director of the International Monetary Fund. In 1947, when his name was linked with pro-Soviet activities by Whittaker Chambers, he submitted his resignation from the International Monetary Fund. The following year, under oath, he denounced Chambers' charges as unqualifiedly false. He claimed that he had never committed a disloyal act. 2 weeks later his funeral was held at Beth Israel in Boston. He had died of a heart attack. In November 1948, Whittaker Chambers produced 5 rolls of microfilmed documents. Among these were 8 handwritten pages that revealed American military secrets. The handwriting was identified as that of Harry Dexter White. Why did the United States give such massive aid to Russia during World War II? Can it be described as another blunder, another mistake on the part of our government? Such a deduction would be naive in the extreme. It would be unworthy of serious consideration. Blood, toil, tears and sweat 177. Those who were running the show, Churchill, in the United States knew the nature of communism. They, their associates and their masters were the creators of the Red Monster. They knew exactly what they were doing. The zeal which approached fanaticism which they displayed in their unstinted support of the blood-spattered Soviet regime, at the expense of the American taxpayer, was a token of their political and philosophical convictions. Soviet Russia was, and is, a definitely recognizable tool in their plan to enslave the whole world under the banner of the New World Order. Let's face the facts. During the years of the Woodrow Wilson administration and since the advent of Roosevelt's New Deal, America's foreign policy has been just that, a national policy towards the other nations of the world that was, and is, totally foreign to the best interests of the United States. The international bankers made a huge capital investment in the Bolshevik Revolution and in the totalitarian regime that resulted from it. Over the last 60+ years they have been using the merciless Red Dictatorship as their foil in the plan to conquer the world. Victory in Europe with the revelations of Major Jordan and Commander Errol. A startling new dimension emerges in the history of World War II. The plan being worked out by the hidden hand now comes into focus and opens up new vistas of understanding. The masters of nations, the international bankers, who were calling the shots from behind the scenes, were working out a very different purpose than was generally assumed by those who were not behind the scenes. Instead of the war being fought to make the world safe for democracy, it was being fought to destroy democracy in many nations.